Hi folks, and welcome back to Meaningful Money. Okay, still here up above Rinsey Cove. You can see pretty angry seas behind me. It's a February afternoon, cold and windy, so I'm hoping that the time hike is not suffering too much from the effects of the wind. I used the last video to talk about trusts and just introduce really this next series, which is all about trusts and how they work, the different kind of things you can do with trusts, the different people who are important in trusts, what trustees can and can't do, what investments you can use and how they're taxed, all these things, right? Important because you may be a trustee or an executor under somebody's will which sets up a trust at some point. You may even be a beneficiary of a trust, and it's important that you know how you might be affected by that. So trusts are an important part of financial planning, but also one which it kind of has a mystique, and I have to say particularly among financial advisors, or many advisors. But trusts are vital, and it's important that any advisor you deal with has a good grasp of how they work. So I said last time there's two main kinds of trusts, what we call vested interest trusts and non-vested interest trusts. So we're going to deal with the former today, vested interest trusts. Now, what that means is, do you remember last time I said there's three important people? There's the settlor who sets up the trust, the trustees who look after the trust, and the beneficiaries who benefit from the trust. Well, what a vested interest trust says is that the beneficiary has a right to the income or the capital and a right to the enjoyment of the trust assets, right? So this is a named person usually, or a named type of person, I'll come back to that in a minute, who can enjoy the benefits of the trust. All right? I'll develop that in a minute. There are two forms of vested interest trust. First is called interest in possession, and the second is called bare trusts. So let's deal with interest in possession trusts first. Now, typically there's two types of these as well, okay? We're going to deal with something called a life interest trust first. Here's the most common one of these that I tend to find, come across in my work as a financial planner. Elderly gentleman dies and he's reasonably well off. He leaves some or all of his money in trust. And what happens is his wife or his widow will get an income from the trust for as long as she is alive. And then when she dies, their children will get the capital from the trust. So that's deemed that the widow has something called a life interest, which means she has an interest for life in the income produced by the trust. That's a life interest trust. And the beneficiary will be named. So, you know, it'll be my wife, Mrs. Smith, will have the right to that income while she is alive. And then when she is dead, my sons, Peter and James, will get the capital, right? That's a life interest. There's a variation on that called a flexible trust or a power of appointment trust. What happens here is that the trustees can choose who benefits from a list, usually, of beneficiaries. And there will be either actual beneficiaries, so like I just mentioned, somebody who is named my wife, Mrs. Smith, or there is a list of what we call potential beneficiaries. So it may be my children or my grandchildren. So rather than actually naming my son Jim, it'll say my sons. And what the trustees have is the power to choose which of the sons, or all of them, can benefit from the trust. So it infers more power on the trustees. So it might be worded something like, you know, I ask my trustees to look after on my behalf for the benefit of my wife, pretty obvious who that is, my children or remoter issue, which is grandchildren, great-grandchildren, possibly even stepchildren, things like that. But if no appointment is made, then for my sons, Peter and James, absolutely. So what you've got there is the trustees can choose from wife, kids, grandkids, stepkids or whatever to benefit from the trust. But if they don't choose anybody, then there is what's called a default beneficiary, which is the sons, Peter and James, right? So that's what we call interest in possession trusts. There are named beneficiaries or classes of beneficiaries. But the trustees, certainly in the latter case, what we call flexible or power of appointment trusts, the trustees have some discretion as to where the money goes to. Now, the second type of vested interest trust is a lot simpler, you'll be pleased to know, and we call those bare trusts or absolute trusts. And that is where the beneficiary has an absolute immediate right to either the income or the capital, and that right can't be taken away. Now, why in that case would you use a trust? Why would you not just give the money to the person, you know, write them a check or something? Why would you go to the hassle, expense of setting up a trust? Well, imagine, let's say you're a grandparent and you want to give some money to your 10-year-old granddaughter. Well, the law says because your granddaughter is a minor, i.e. not an adult, she can't give what's called a valid receipt for that money. She can't accept it because she's not an adult. And so the money has to go into trust, and the trustees look after it on behalf of that child until she reaches the age 18 and becomes an adult. So usually we use bare trusts for children or grandchildren, but also maybe perhaps a compensation arrangement. Perhaps somebody has a terrible accident and they are paid some compensation. Well, that might be placed into a bare trust because they may be incapacitated. They may not be mentally capable of accepting that money, and so a trust is set up. But it is a trust entirely for the benefit of one named person. That's what a bare trust is. Bare trusts are no good at all if the circumstances of the beneficiary may change at any point. That's vested interest trusts. You've got interest in possession, of which you've got life interest then and flexible power of appointment, and you've got bare trusts, two main types. Leave any questions in the comments or on Facebook or whatever YouTube channel. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching, and goodbye from Rincey Cove. Next time, it's non-vested interest trusts.